Good evening, everyone. My name is Gilbert, and on behalf of Vroman's Bookstore, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event with David Davis as he speaks with Ron Kovic about his new book, Wheels of Courage. We're so excited and grateful that our bookstore can bring you authors in this way as we all figure out how to deal with what's going on now. And it's really a pleasure to have these gentlemen here tonight. Now, Vroman's Live will continue to host virtual events for the foreseeable future, and you can learn more about them on our website as well as our social media. Our next event is Monday, September 28th at 6 p.m. as we host our monthly Vroman's Local Author Day. This edition will feature Melissa Fisher, Marilyn N. Robertson, and Mail Page. For regular updates on upcoming Vroman's Live events, please feel free to subscribe to our newsletter. Tonight's virtual event will have a Q&A component. So to submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen, which is kind of right over here. If you see a question on the list that you'd like for our speakers to answer, please click the like button, which is a little arrow on the side. We'll try to answer as many questions as time will allow. And also, we encourage you to purchase a copy of tonight's featured book, Wheels of Courage, by clicking on the buy button directly below the viewer screen here. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. As a reminder, Vroman's encourages you to support independent bookstores, in particular Vroman's Bookstore, as we hit these pretty tough times for everyone, and will be available for all kinds of one-stop shopping needs as we go into the holiday season. With that being said, let me introduce our author and interviewer for tonight. Our interviewer is Ron Kovic. He served 2 tours of duty during the Vietnam War. He was paralyzed from his chest down in combat in 1968 and has been in a wheelchair ever since. Along with Oliver Stone, Kovic was the co-screenwriter of the 1989 Academy Award-winning film based on Kovic's best-selling memoir, Born on the 4th of July, starring Tom Cruise as Kovic. Hurricane Street is his latest work. He will be speaking with our author for this evening, David Davis. He's the author and editor of 6 books, including Waterman, The Life and Times of Duke Kahamaku. I should have rehearsed that beforehand. Shadow at Shepherd's Bush, the 1908 Olympic Marathon, and The Three Runners Who Launched a Sporting Craze, and many others. He began his career as a journalist with the LA Weekly newspaper, and his work has appeared in Sports Illustrated, Smithsonian Magazine, The New York Times, Wall Street Journal, SB Nation, Deadspin, and Vice, among others, and has been anthologized in the Best American Sports Writing series. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to David and Ron. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you, Gilbert.
Thank you, Gilbert. It's a great honor to be at Vroman's. I've spent many evenings on the second floor listening to local authors speak about their books. So really appreciate the invitation. Want to say hi to everybody out there who I haven't been able to see face-to-face in person. So thank you for tuning in, and obviously doubly honored that Ron Kovic has agreed to speak with me tonight about the book.
Ron Kovic.
Kovic, yes.
No, Kovac.
Not Kovac. We were introduced by Tom Hoffarth, a sports media writer, local scribe here years ago, and Ron has been very encouraging and helped me quite a bit with this book in terms of background and research and so forth. Ron, of course, was a Vietnam veteran. Most of the book that I wrote is about World War II veterans. And I just want to give you a little background before Ron and I start speaking. Before World War II, if you were paralyzed, you were pretty much a dead ender, a no-hoper, as they were called. If the average lifespan was 18 months for someone wounded in World War I. World War II was a game changer. The advent of penicillin, sulfa drugs. They had surgical units right behind the battlefield, right behind the front lines, and they had better evacuation back to the mainland. And so by the end of World War II, you had a cohort of about 2,500 U.S. veterans who were paralyzed, who returned home, and they had a chance at a normal lifespan. And this was the first cohort that was going to have this. And it presented a dilemma and a bit of an issue for the VA, the Veterans Administration, and the government. In other words, how do we take care of these men? Before, basically, they were immobilized in full body plaster casts, shunted off to institutions, or basically, if they were a family, they were in the family home and had no mobility. The cliche or the term confined to a wheelchair was true because you couldn't move around. They were unwieldy wheelchairs. They were like living room furniture. And that, again, was a game changer. World War II, Everest and Jennings, which were made locally, they were wheelchairs that were made locally. And they were a game changer because they could fold. You could put them in the car and then drive away and get a job and start a family and so forth. And so these 2,500 paralyzed veterans were pioneers. And one of the key attributes of rehabilitation and the rehabilitation medicine in the VA hospitals was recreation. And we're going to roll a clip now. You're going to see one of the first wheelchair basketball games ever played. It was at Madison Square Garden in 1948. And you'll see they're using the Everest and Jennings chairs, which in today's world, we would think of as just incredibly old-fashioned and not very maneuverable. But back then, those were state-of-the-art. And this is a game featuring paralyzed veterans from Cushing Hospital in Framingham, Massachusetts. They came down to New York City to play against a team from Staten Island, Halloran Hospital. And you can see the game is very sort of crude. There's not a whole lot of offensive plays and things like that. But this is the first time that paralyzed veterans and paraplegics are displayed in front of huge crowds. You have 15,000 people admiring these pioneers, these veterans who have managed to start a normal life, and sport was part of that. One of the key teams, and we'll see this in the next clip, but one of the key teams, and by the way, this was sort of the result. You had media coverage. This was one of the players in that game, Jack Gerhardt from Halloran. He was wounded on Normandy, and here he is on the cover of Newsweek. And every media outlet covered these guys, from the Communist Daily Worker to Popular Mechanics. And out here in Southern California, there was a bastion of wheelchair basketball, and this was out of the Birmingham VA Hospital in Van Nuys in the San Fernando Valley. And this caught the attention of Hollywood. And here's Marlon Brando in his first Hollywood movie, Star, and he plays a paralyzed veteran, and he's rehabbing, and some of this was filmed out in Van Nuys. And these are some of the exercises, and it's one of the reasons why wheelchair basketball became so popular, both for the veterans, but also for why the doctors touted it, was because it did help with the chest, the arms, the shoulder muscles, which are so important for paraplegics, because for helping them to move around and to have the strength to be able to do this. Here's what I was mentioning about the Everest and Jennings. He's going into the car with his co-star there. That folds up and goes right into the second seat, and he can drive away. Yes. And these are specially adapted cars for paraplegics. And you'll see the house that he's now walking in. These paralyzed veterans formed the PVA, which still exists, the Paralyzed Veterans of America. When this team from Birmingham would go on the road, they would stop in Washington, D.C. and lobby Congress for rights, for disability rights, including adaptive cars and a stipend to build a house that had ramps and so forth. And here we see Brando playing some wheelchair basketball and playing sports. This was water polo that was shot at the pool there, and one of the veterans who I write extensively about in the book was in this film as an extra. They used a bunch of extras who were paralyzed veterans as background actors. And again, you see, obviously, Brando, this was a role that was very attractive to him, his first role after playing Streetcar Named Desire and becoming a fan, becoming a star, I should say. Ron, of course, you weren't played by Marlon Brando. You were played by Tom Cruise. What about that?
David, I just wanted to say that, first of all, it's a pleasure to be participating with you today. My very first wheelchair was an Everson Jennings wheelchair. You made me feel very old, but my very first chair was an Everson Jennings, and it was the first chair that I had, and it worked for me back then. It was 1968. I was shot January 20th, 1968, on my second tour of duty as a United States Marine in Vietnam, in the DMZ area, and I was shot to the right shoulder, and it went through my right lung and paralyzed me from my mid-chest down. I've been paralyzed from my mid-chest down for the last, 52, 53 years? Yeah, 53 years. So I remember looking yesterday and realizing that even up to World War II, a lot of the paraplegics and quadriplegics were not living past a year or 18 months, as you said. And I'm so grateful to be alive, still alive. And I've lost many friends along the way. This is not an easy disability, an easy physical challenge to deal with. It's psychologically, emotionally, it's a great challenge, yeah.
Maybe you can tell the audience about that. When you came back, you ended up at the Bronx VA, as I recall.
Yeah, the Bronx VA, which ironically was later investigated by Life magazine. They did a front page, a front cover. Our Forgotten Wounded was the title. Our Forgotten Wounded. It really it shook up the whole VA. It was a story of neglect of the young men coming back from Vietnam with some of the most catastrophic injuries you could imagine. Paraplegics, quadriplegics, young men paralyzed from the neck down. Some of the most severe injuries you could imagine. Being neglected, rats on the ward, overcrowded conditions. I'm sure many of you who are watching this right now might have seen this in the Tom Cruise movie Born on the 4th of July. All of that was true. And that's how I began my life at the age of 21. I'm in this place. Not only was I dealing with paralysis, just the shock of having lost 3/4 of my body, everything from my chest down, never be able to make children. But I must say, from the moment I left the field of battle and I received last rites from the Catholic Church, which they really didn't know whether I was going to make it or not, in Da Nang in the intensive care ward. I've never not felt grateful to be alive every single day, no matter how hard it has gotten over the years. And there's been some really difficult moments, especially in the early years, depressing moments when I drank way too much, moments when I came close to giving up and leaving this world way too early. There was a part of me that knew that I had made it out of there, just barely. I had somehow gotten out of there. Now, after I was shot first in the front of my right foot. The bullet went through my foot and blew out the back of my heel. I could no longer walk. I went into a prone position, and then I took a round through my right shoulder, collapsed my right lung, and severed my spine from the mid-chest down. I couldn't move, and my rifle was in the sand. My rifle wouldn't fire anymore. It was jammed, and the first Marine to come up from behind was shot in the heart. Right behind me, was killed instantly, killed right in back of me. And then another Marine came back a few moments later, came up from behind, grabbed me, threw me over his shoulder, and ran me back under heavy fire and saved my life. I've never forgotten that day, and I've never forgotten how lucky I am to have survived. So even during the most difficult times. And I mean, those early years were very, very difficult. And many of the young men, severely wounded, paralyzed veterans, quadriplegics, those first few years were too much for them. But some of us decided to go on. And I remember sitting in my room in my wheelchair in Massapequa, Long Island, all alone, and I remember having this feeling of thinking to myself, how am I going to make it through another day? I had just met, we would have some of the veterans from World War II and Korea come into our room at the Bronx VA, and they were inspiring. They would, just to see these guys who had been in wheelchairs for 5 years, 10 years, even longer. I mean, I couldn't believe it because I was just trying to make it. I was trying to make it through every single day. It was psychologically, emotionally, physically overwhelming for me. I had no idea how I was going to live with this thing and how I was going to deal with it every day. I could have never imagined that I would have the future that I eventually had, that I was able to eventually address the Democratic National Convention in New York, that I was able to write a book that became a bestseller and read around the world, and I was able to eventually have a movie made of my life. So I feel very blessed. My life in many ways has been a blessing in disguise. Athleticism and you talk about the whole wheelchair basketball. Well,
Yeah.
when I got out of the hospital, David, I decided through the GI Bill, I had the opportunity, and I wasn't a great student, believe me. I had to go to summer school in Massapequa High School just to get a general diploma, which was mailed to me. So I wasn't going to college, and I had decided I'm going to join the Marines, make my mom and dad proud, and I ended up coming home paralyzed. But I remember, it was just...
How did you get started, Ron, in terms of after you came out of the VA hospital?
Well,
Wheelchair basketball yourself. How did that happen?
Well, first of all, I was able to go to college, even with, I had, my academic standing was not the best at the time. So I was still able to go. They gave me the opportunity to go. And Hofstra University had a basketball team. It was called the Rolling Dutchman. And I was, I grew up wanting to play for the New York Yankees. I was, Little League and basketball and football and wiffle ball, and if you came from New York, you were heavily into sports, and we were in our neighborhood, and the Yankees and Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris. All these dreams of being an athletic hero, And I was very strong. I was very athletic. I was a gymnast in high school, and even before I joined the Rolling Dutchman, a wheelchair basketball team, which was quite an experience for me. I used to shoot baskets when I would have some time. There was a court just at the VA, just down this little hill. There was a little basketball court. I'd go down there by myself for hours. 2-3 hours, and I just shoot, and I loved it. And I did that by myself until I found out that they had this organized wheelchair basketball team at the university, and I decided to join. Now, what led me to join was I had my first political organization that I decided to join, very interestingly enough, was called PUSH, People United to Support the Handicapped. So my first political organization, and as the years had followed, I was to be involved in a lot of politics and a lot of protests. But this organization was made of exclusively paraplegics, quadriplegics, not just veterans, but cerebral palsy, the blind, sight impaired, you name it, we had it. And we were, back then, you have to understand, it was a very tumultuous time. There were people in the streets, there were demonstrations, revolution was in the air, and even this group that met once a week at Hofstra University, which eventually led me to join the basketball team, this group was filled with passion, filled with verve and and a certain sense of rebellion. The school was that way. The country was extremely polarized, any of you who have lived during that time, had the good fortune of living through that extraordinary time in history where the Vietnam War and the country was split, very similar in many ways to what's going on right now. But I have to say that this organization pushed People United to Support the Handicapped. That was the first organization that gave me a certain confidence. And a woman, a particular woman that I met, who ironically, she had been in my high school. She eventually became an author later in life, but she's since passed away. Connie Panzarino, who I dedicated Born on the 4th of July to, I remember leaving the VA one day, going to Hofstra. I had the day off. They allowed me to go there so that I could meet the dean who was going to allow me to go to the school. And I can still remember his name, Dean Cedar. And I went into the office, and there was a girl in the office in a wheelchair, Connie Panzarino, with a severe disability that had occurred at birth. She said to me, you look familiar. I think, did you go to Massapequa High School? And I said, yeah. She said, well, I used to watch you with your varsity sweater walking past me in the hallway. And I said, I remember you. You were the only disabled person in a wheelchair in our entire school back then. And she said, yes. And she said, I started to drive her home because she needed a drive home, which she said she did. But I would drive her home, and she was not far from my town. I would drop her off, and I got to know her parents. One thing led to another. She asked me to join this People United to Support the Handicapped for everything from curb cuts. But you must know that Hofstra University was really at the forefront back then. It prided itself in the fact that it was catering to it was welcoming the disabled, welcoming physically. And this was a big change in the early 70s, which eventually led to the Americans with the Disability Act. But she was the one who led me to this first political organization of physically challenged people. And then from there, she said, well, we've got a wheelchair basketball team here at Hofstra University. She said, why don't you go down and I know that, you were an athlete in high school, and you were a wrestler, a varsity wrestler, and you love sports, and why don't you go down and see? And I went down, and they allowed me to be they accepted me, and my level of injury was pretty high. It still is. I mean, I had no balance, but it was thrilling. It really was. It was, it was exciting to be with other young men like myself with very similar disabilities, and to be actually competing. And there was a feeling of transcendence, where for a moment you forgot. For a moment you weren't thinking of being paralyzed. For a moment you were shooting a basket. You were trying to make a hook shot. It was exciting. It was great. It was wonderful. And you felt great inside physically. I mean, whatever depression you might have had, or whatever doubts or feelings that there were. I mean, I was dealing with a lot of not just physical, but because of what I had gone through during my second tour of duty, I was dealing with a lot of psychological trauma from what I had gone through during that second tour. I was struggling with it. I was struggling with whether I had a right to stay alive or to give up. I mean, I felt a tremendous amount of survivor's guilt, and I wondered if I deserved to be alive, because others had died and I had survived, and people I had been responsible for, who I had led into battle, had been killed, and yet I was still alive. Even though I was paralyzed, I felt a terrible guilt, and I lived with that for a long time. It was a long journey, to move through that, and to be able to emerge from that, and be able to forgive myself and forgive those who might have hurt me, also forgive those who might have sent me to that war. I'm sorry for going on.
No, that's quite all right. I wanted to circle back on something that you mentioned and previously about when you were in the VA, and you had, I guess, in a sense, the support of World War II and Korea War veterans. Go ahead. What was that experience like for you, for the veterans who had gone through all of this?
Well, it was, I was, I'm laying there. Yeah, I'm laying there in my bed, and and you have these guys come in here with this cocky, very positive attitude. How you doing? How's it going? Carlos Rodriguez. One of the real inspirations and one of the founders, early founders of PVA, Paralyzed Veterans of America, and a character and a half, and a real mover and a shaker, and had that thick New York Bronx accent or whatever. But how you doing? What's going on? How can we help you? What can we do? And how long you been in a wheelchair? I said to him, and I had a difficult day and wondered if I could make it to that night, And he said, I've been in a wheelchair, 12 years, 11, 12 years, wounded in Korea, And these guys were an inspiration. They would come into our rooms. They were very, very important to us back then, because I was across from Willie Ware, who had been paralyzed so severely that he had he was paralyzed from the neck down, if you can imagine, and he had to be. There was a hole in his throat with a little cork on it. I wrote about it in Born on the 4th of July. They once a day they would pull out the cork, and they would put a tube in there, and I would have to listen to this. And all the rest of the guys in my room, there were about 3 or 4 others. They would be suctioning the phlegm out of his lungs so he wouldn't get pneumonia. And I heard that every single day. And it was just so moving. I felt so lucky to be alive, and yet here was a guy right across from me who was just trying to live with a head. All he had was a head. And how could these people not inspire you? And then people like the World War II vets and Korean vets coming into your room and telling you, you can do something with your life. Your life is not over. I mean, for a long time, I remember a guy would come in. He was recruiting paraplegics to work for the Boulevard Watch Company. He wanted me to make watches, to work on watches. And that's where a lot of the guys were sent to the watchmaking company. I used to say to myself, that's not me. I always had big dreams as a kid, and maybe it was not a good thing to dream so big, but I always thought that my life could have a much greater meaning than, and I'm not knocking people working in a watch company or having a job, but I just wanted to do more. I wanted my life to really count, to really stand for something. Even before I was paralyzed, I had been inspired by John F. Kennedy, and I wanted to be like John F. Kennedy. I wanted to be like John Wayne. I mean, maybe it was unhealthy, maybe it was megalomaniacal, but that's who I was, and I was an American. I think that's very much having grown up an American boy in this country, having dreams, beyond all dreams, and believing you could be anything you wanted to be, no matter what happened to you, and that sustained me. Even back then, after I was paralyzed, I said, I want to do something great with my life. I did say those things, yeah.
And I want to just interrupt for a second about the Boulevard. That was
watch company, yeah.
That was a program started for the World War II vets by Arde Boulevard. He built a watchmaking school in Queens.
Right.
When you're going to John F. Kennedy Airport, you'll go by some of those buildings there. And eventually they had a basketball team called the Boulevard Watchmakers. And
that had a wheelchair team called, I had no idea. Yeah,
when you think about it, it was one of the first corporate sponsors of, a sports team. And not that far away, there was another company team called the Pan Am Jets, and they were mostly post-polio patients. And so anyway, that's the part of the story about Boulevard Watchmakers. As you mentioned, Ron, that was part of rehabilitation was vocational. And,
absolutely, yeah.
Right. And the VA administrators figured, let's get these guys in a job in a wheelchair. They can do watchmaking repair or watchmaking. So
right.
anyway, it connected in that regard.
Many of the veterans took that route, and I think, I mean, it's just, I admire the head of Boulevard Watch Company to do that. And I mean, I love the name of the team, by the way. You know, that name is really catchy. You know, I love that. But I have to say this: I probably took the wrong turn. You know, I was grumpy and I had an attitude, and I don't know how my mom and dad ever put up with me. Listen, I used to go out to Arthur's Bar and come home drunk. I mean, I came home drunk. I mean, you might have seen the scene in Born on the 4th of July, and I was just. You remember Brando in The Men? I was worse than Brando in The Men. I mean, I was terrible. You know, I was a juvenile delinquent at 21. You know, in a wheelchair. You know, and
I think that's a good point, because I don't want to whitewash the experience in the sense of, oh, they started playing wheelchair basketball and everything was okay.
No way.
The recovery took a while. As you mentioned, there's psychological elements.
Yeah.
There was a lot of pain, both physical and psychological.
Can you imagine losing most of your body, having pulled a trigger and killed people, knowing that you had killed people right in front of you, you had taken a life out of this world, not to mention the fact that someone almost killed you, and you somehow are dragged out of this place with only a quarter of a body left, your head, the upper part of your body, and you got to make something out of this. You got to find a way to keep living, you know.
Find a way. And before we go on, I just want to throw out this to the audience. You know, if you have questions for Ron or myself, please feel free to type them in, and you know, we'll have one of us will answer. But just want to make sure you all know that function is viable on this.
David, can I say just one thing?
Of course.
Yeah. I really want to recommend this book. This book is inspiring. One of the things that David touches upon, and he writes beautifully and passionately, he touches upon the fact that this group, these men, you know, these men who played in Madison Square Garden in that clip that you saw, these men of World War II, of Okinawa, you know, of the European theater, who came back with these devastating injuries, they were of the greatest generation as well. And this book recognizes them. Probably for the first time, we begin to recognize the fact, in a very honorable way, that this group, these men, were very much a piece of that great generation. By the way, you know, my mother and father both served during World War II. My mother joined the Navy a week after Pearl Harbor. My father, who was in Wisconsin at the time, planting trees under the Roosevelt's WPA program. He lived on a farm, my dad, a dairy farm. Right after December 7th, 1941, my father immediately, as so many other Americans did, went to sign up. The Monday after that Sunday, December 7th, my father was lined up to join the service and to support his country, you know. So, right. So I grew up with parents who had served during the Second World War as well.
And you, of course, were born, obviously 4th of July, but you were born in 1946, right after the war.
Just a little while ago.
Yeah. And there was quite a different reaction, and I wanted to ask you about this. There was quite a different reaction for when the World War II veterans came home versus when Vietnam veterans like yourself came home. And I wanted to know, maybe you could address that and talk to that point a little bit. In other words, what was the reaction that you found when you returned home finally to Long Island and tried to start your life anew?
Well, you know, growing up in the 50s with you know, the John Wayne movies, Matty Mattel submachine guns, the culture, I don't know if you remember, there was a TV show on CBS called The Big Picture, and I grew up watching this about World War II, whether it was in the Pacific Theater or whether it was in Europe. It was about our heroes coming back from World War II, and you know, we were all aware of that, and you know, that's what we thought America was like. And when we came back from Vietnam, as I said to you the other day, I remember silence. Nobody really wanted to talk about it. They didn't want to talk about the war. And yet our lives have been profoundly affected traumatically by that experience. And yeah, I remember feeling, I know a lot of veterans said that they felt that they were mistreated and abused, and I just felt people just shut off their feelings. They didn't want to talk about it, and that was very difficult. That hurt. And I was doing the same thing. I think I was trying to numb myself from what had happened, and just somehow, because this was overwhelming emotionally. I was having anxiety attacks. I was sticking my finger down my throat every morning over the toilet bowl, just retching. I wasn't sick to my stomach. I was just doing that to break the terror that I felt every morning waking up. I mean, I would wake up to a nightmare every morning. I would go to bed to a nightmare every night. I mean, I couldn't go to sleep at night. Because when I was wounded and I was shot on that day, I fought to stay awake. I was frightened to death as they pulled me off the field, as they went back across the river, as I went to the first aid station. And you're correct in what you said earlier about how quickly, I mean, I was immediately taken care of. Once I was pulled off the field, once my life was saved by that Marine who saved my life, who, by the way, later on that afternoon was killed in an artillery attack. He died the day he saved my life. And I went back across the river in an amphibious tractor. Immediately on the other side of the river where our battalion command center was, I was being attended to by doctors. I was being cared for. I was put on a helicopter immediately. And then I was put on a plane down to Da Nang. Immediately, I was in the intensive care ward. Immediately, I was receiving last rites of the Catholic Church, and I was being operated on. So, I mean, this was very, very different, and I was able to survive and come home,
Right. And all of that, what you went through in terms of that sort of chain of command in terms of your treatment had all started in World War II and Korea. Korea starts the MASH units where they evacuate by helicopter and so forth. Yeah. One of the veterans that I was...
let me just say this, David. They saved our lives.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here. I mean, this was a savage wound. It really was. And I live with a savage wound every day, but I don't feel that way. I feel whole. I feel like I've transcended this. I know I'm paralyzed. I know it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult every day, but yet I feel that I've risen above it, moved beyond it, and so I think it's important that people realize that, that
right, that there is life, there is a afterward. Absolutely.
And you can move beyond anybody listening to this or watching this right now, no matter how tragic you may think your circumstances are, and no matter how you're tormented or struggling emotionally, and you have doubts whether your life has meaning, never give up, never quit, because you never know what's around the bend. You never know how your life can change. You never know what's waiting for you out there. Could I have ever imagined, David, when I was first wounded, that some famous movie star would play my life story and millions of people would see that around the world? How could I ever imagine that? That I would write a book, that it would end up on the front page of the New York Times Book Review on a Sunday, and my mother would say, "How'd you ever do that? You were terrible in high school."
That's the trick, obviously.
Yeah.
So one of the veterans that I do write about from World War II, he was paralyzed on Okinawa. His name was Jerry Fessenmeier, Gene Fessenmeier. I was able to meet with him and interview him and hang out with him before he passed away. Thankfully, he knew that this book was on its way before he passed away. But his life intersected with yours in a particular place, and I'd like to ask you about it because it's not that well known. But Jerry Fessenmeier lived a very full life. He was in a wheelchair 70 some odd years.
20 years more than me. I can only hope I make it that far, you know.
Well, you're on your way for sure.
Yeah.
And he lived all over. He lived in Hawaii. He lived in Southern California. He wanted to live life the fullest. And one of those stops on his journey was to Guadalajara, Mexico, which became known as Guadalajara because of the vast numbers of veterans, paralyzed veterans, U.S. paralyzed veterans, who would go down to Mexico to live because they could live cheap and they could have some fun. And I understand you went down there and lived in Guadalajara. And I wanted to ask you, what was that experience like?
Well, I wrote about it in Born on the 4th of July, and it's true. I went down there, and back then in Guadalajara, there was a place called Villa del Sol, the Village of the Sun, the Village of the Sun, and that was the name of the compound. And they were I went almost exclusively Vietnam veterans, paralyzed and quadriplegic. Many of you probably saw the scene in the movie with that's quite a colorful scene at the Village of the Sun, you know. And I wanted to get out of the States, and I found out about Mexico and Guadalajara when I was on the paraplegic ward one day. A guy in a wheelchair who I knew, who I'd spent time with on the ward, he comes wheeling down the ward with a sombrero hat on his head, and a beautiful young woman he shouldn't have been going out with. I mean, she looked she looked like she was 18, you know, a young woman, and he was probably, well, we weren't that old. But anyway, he came up to me and he said, we're going to have a conversation. I want you to meet my wife, and he said, I said, how you doing? He said, you got to go to Mexico. You got to go to Guadalajara. You got to go to the Village of the Sun. He said, it'll change your life. Either that or it'll take your life, but it'll change your life. So I went to this place. I remember getting drunk one night again. I mean, I was drinking a lot back then, and at Arthur's Bar. I don't know how I got home. I don't know how I drove. I could hardly see. I mean, I was blind drunk, and I drove back to my house in Massapequa. And I pulled my wheelchair out. I got in my wheelchair. I wheeled up the ramp my father had built and put it in front of our house. And I remember saying, crawling into the bed, hooking up to my bed bag with my catheter, which I've used ever since, and saying to myself, what am I doing? What am I doing? Where's my life going? And I made a decision. I think it was the next day I went down and I got a ticket to fly from Kennedy Airport to Mexico City, direct flight to Mexico City. I changed planes and I was headed to Guadalajara. I was going to do what that guy told me. I was going to try to find my wife, a woman, down at Guadalajara. That was my main motivation. I couldn't find a girl. I couldn't meet anybody. Maybe it was my own insecurity. I don't know. And I had a lot of insecurity back then. But I wanted to have what happened to that guy with the sombrero and his girlfriend, his wife, happen to me. I wanted love. I wanted to meet somebody. So I flew down to Guadalajara, landed there, and I remember this guy who ran the Village of the Sun. I remember his name to this day, Regilio. Oh, he carried me into this truck, this old broken down truck, and he drove me, it must have been 20, 30 miles through this darkened countryside to the Village of the Sun in Guadalajara. It was really quite an experience. The next morning I got up, I was in this little room. It was very humble, had this simple little bed. It was, nothing fancy at all. It made Motel 6 look like a prehistoric cave. It was really very basic. And there was a main area where everybody, a long table, and it was, all the guys were lined up in their wheelchairs on both sides. And that's how we had breakfast every morning. We had dinner every night at a certain hour. And we had our rooms. And I happened to fall in with some of the wrong people, as you might have seen in the movie. Charlie, who was a wild man from Chicago, Charlie. Yeah, what's your name, Charlie? How long you been here? 100 years or something, whatever he said. And I told him, everybody here, meet Ron Kovic from Massapequa, New York. I fell in with this wild man, really, and he took me under his wing, and I just was willing to run with anybody back then. I mean, I wanted to live. I wanted to meet some girls. I wanted to, and so he took me into the city. He said, I'll take you out," and he took me. He started taking me to the different whorehouses in the city, so I could meet a wife. Amazing. And so I went with Charlie, and I don't know if you saw the movie. Maybe
Yeah.
I don't want this bookstore to go out of business if I tell the rest of the story, But I had never had sex before, and this was my first experience with sex. I was paralyzed before I ever made love to anybody for the first time. I was so young. I was trying to be a good Catholic boy. I didn't want to burn in the fires of hell. So I had not made love or had sex with any woman, even in high school. I was 21 years old. And then all of a sudden, boom, I was paralyzed, everything from the mid-chest down. I would never have sex again, or at least that type of sex as we all know it. And I would never be able to have children. But here I was lining up in a whorehouse in Mexico trying to find love,
Right.
And so here I was, and I ended up on these mattresses in Guadalajara in these whorehouses with these women. I can't. I mean, they were particularly young. I don't know how young they were, but I didn't even know what to do, And as you saw in that one scene in Born on the 4th of July, I started crying, and saying, I can't move this, I can't move that, I can't do that, and it was very difficult, painful, frustrating, traumatic for me at first. But
Right.
Sexuality, I mean, I'm thinking of all these guys of World War II, something that's not often said. The loss of our sexuality, the loss of that aspect of our lives, the loss of the ability to make children, to have some type of normalcy in our life. That was something we were almost afraid to tell people about. And Guadalajara provided that for me. It provided you could call it a place of experimentation, or where I could at least experience women for the first time who were not going to laugh at me, not make fun of me because I couldn't move certain parts of my body or feel them anymore, but they who would accept me and allow me to begin the journey toward discovering what sexuality really was, that there were other aspects to sexuality other than that one particular approach that I had lost in the war. I know this is, maybe this bothers people to hear this, but it was not just that I couldn't move my legs, that I would never stand or walk again, but it was also that I could not experience this experience that everyone said was so wonderful and exciting. So it was the beginning of a journey for me to find meaning and purpose in my life. Guadalajara provided that, and Charlie was dragging me from one whorehouse to the next, if you want to know. I mean,
Right.
We were getting drunk, we were getting thrown out of places, and this man was dangerous. I mean, he was. We got thrown out of one place, and I thought, first of all, they threw him out the front door, out of his wheelchair, onto the street, and I wondered if we were going to survive this place. And I don't know if you remember in Born on the 4th of July, in the cab ride, trying to get back to the Village of the Sun, he starts fighting with the cab driver, tries to tell him that he's cheating us, starts calling him all sorts of names, and the cab driver ended up throwing us on the roadside, and we were lucky enough to have gotten back to the village that night. We were abandoned in the middle of the desert, So
Right.
Guadalajara, suffice to say, was quite an experience for me. And at the same time, I was very happy to get back to the United States, and I felt a certain, thank God I'm finally back home in Massapequa, I guess.
Right. Well, thank you for that experience, Ron. But I will, just to add to that, certainly the World War II veterans who I wrote about, many of them adopted children, and that was part of their journey to normalcy, to the new normal, as you would say. We have
David, many of them. Yeah, I have to say this. I was, I'm one person. What I went through, but I mean, I was witness to the fact that yes, many of them had very normal lives. Many of them raised children and had normal families. I don't know why it took me. I've never been married, and I never adopted any children, but I've been able to find love and a very special woman in my life right now.
Yes, and she helped us connect with this internet thing that we're all Zooming and crowdcasting with. So we appreciate that, Terry Ann. Thank you.
I couldn't do anything without her. No.
We have a question. We have a question from your pal Tom Hofar.
Tom, yeah, hi Tom.
He asks. He knows that obviously you played some wheelchair basketball. Did you ever play wheelchair baseball?
No, I never did. But in Massapequa on Toronto Avenue, which was the street right in front of my house that I grew up in, God, we would play football, and I was always obviously I was a quarterback, and I loved football in a wheelchair. I didn't, and also when I was still a patient at the Bronx VA, there was a workout mat, and I used to challenge other paraplegics because I was a varsity wrestler at the high school. I would challenge them to wrestle me, and everything was paralyzed from my mid chest down. All I had was my upper body, and I was still pretty strong. And I would wrestle these guys. It was just amazing. But that was even after being paralyzed and even after being shot and wounded, there was that physicality. There was that desire to be physically involved in the sports that I loved as a young man. And no, I never played wheelchair or played wheelchair baseball, but I did pick up a wiffle ball bat. And I used to have my brother. I tried to do what I did when I was a kid. I tried to play wiffle ball again in the backyard, and it was, I could still hit the ball with one hand with a wiffle ball bat, but there was something missing. There was something that was hurting inside. It was not the same, and it would never be the same again. But at the same time, I continued, and I know who Tom is, and I continued my love of sports. And Tom is a great sports writer, and it's an honor to have his question. But one of the things I thought was so interesting when I started doing the research on this book, coming from someone who really didn't know about the origin of wheelchair sports, was sort of why did they pick wheelchair basketball? Why was that the first great team sport that was played? And you would think it didn't quite match because basketball values height, a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Michael Jordan. You want to be up close towards the basket. On the other hand, having said that, basketball, the court is smooth. It's big enough to hold 10 players and their wheelchairs. And when you think about it, baseball is really, with a grass field anyway, baseball is very difficult. Yeah, it'll take about 3 hours to get to first base, even with a bunt.
Right. So there's another question here, Ron. So let me get to this one, and we're getting towards the end of our time. So, and I'm not quite. You mentioned in the past there was a lot of silence around the topic. What has served to shift the volume of the conversation? Thank you, Linnell. It's good to hear you and see you. That there was Ron, what has shifted that there was so much silence around the topic?
Around the war?
Let's see.
Ron, what particular topic?
Around this topic, around paraplegia.
Well,
disability.
We're talking about World War II veterans. We know what specifically happened at Madison Square Garden on that one particular night. Just before this game with the New York Knicks began, the public address system, somebody announced that there was going to be a special little a pre-event, and all of a sudden these guys in wheelchairs came out onto the court. Nobody had ever seen this before. They had thousands of people in the arena. If you've ever been, and I've been there, Madison Square Garden, great sports arena, and they came out, and people didn't know what to make of them, and they didn't know whether to feel sorry for them or what. So there was this silence, and the game began, and one of the guys in a wheelchair fell out of the chair, and there was this gasps all throughout the garden, and but what happened was very important at that moment. He turned around, he grabbed the wheelchair, and he pulled himself back into the chair, sat down, and he started yelling at the referee. From what I read in your book, and started yelling and playing, and all of a sudden everybody started cheering at Madison Square Garden, and their feeling about who these men were. They were regular guys, who had been wounded in the war, who came back, who still had a lot of fight and a lot of spirit, and they weren't done yet. And so that was very important to me when I read that in your book. But,
right. And just to add to that, I mean, when you think about it, before the war, the president of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was a polio patient and used a wheelchair. He refused basically to ever allow himself to be photographed while he was sitting in his wheelchair. There was such a stigma about disability back then. Yeah. And obviously there still is stigma about disability to this day. But I think what the paralyzed veterans, by being out there, by being in Madison Square Garden, by defeating, by the way, able-bodied teams that would borrow wheelchairs for the occasion, and by forming the Paralyzed Veterans of America, a group that has become a very powerful lobbyist group in DC, that helped reduce the stigma. That helped bring about some change in our society.
Yeah,
it's a long process, but one of the things I found fascinating was the team out here from Van Nuys would, whenever they would make their road trip back east, they would always stop in Washington, D.C., and they would lobby Congress and senators and the White House about disability.
No, I mean, they were, the word is pioneers. They were. And they're the reason why I have the life that I have today, why I have the acceptance. And other physically challenged or disabled people like myself have that acceptance and that understanding that, we're equal to everyone else. We can rise to the high. There's a saying that I've heard for many years, and I don't particularly believe it. It says, Roosevelt was elected president of the United States back then, but no person in a wheelchair today could be elected president of the United States. I don't agree with that. I don't believe that. I believe our potential as disabled people, as the potential is physically challenged people. We're all physically challenged. Come on. It's unlimited. Everybody has a physical challenge. I mean, everybody deals with disability. The most traumatic disability of all is when you're dead and you're not here anymore. That can't be any. What's more disabling than not being alive anymore? Give me a break. So everybody goes through disability. Everybody deals with this disability. We're all dealing with it. We're not all admitting it to ourselves, but I think physically challenged people represent an inspiration, and that's why I think your book is so important. It honors the greatest generation. It honors an element of the greatest generation in an eloquent, in a beautifully put together way. I mean, I recommend that you read this book. And David, I said to you yesterday, no, let me say it again. You just be quiet there. You wrote beautifully. It's beautifully written.
I want to point out, as Tom Hofarth points out, I mean, Tammy Duckworth was the senator in Illinois, almost became the vice president nominee for Joe Biden, who certainly was considered for that. So she's in a wheelchair, of course.
I'll predict right now that someday in the future of this great country of ours, that a man or a woman in a wheelchair will rise to the office of the presidency of the United States. I'm saying that right now. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll hold you to that. I want to say at this point, if there's any other questions, please let me know. Okay, Tom has another one. Ron, do you watch a lot of basketball? And if so, who are your favorite players?
Well, I mean, the LeBron James, the Lakers, of course. But I have to tell you, I know Tom, and Tom and I've met in the Village here in Redondo Beach several times, and he's just a wonderful writer. But anyway, Tom, as I told you many times, my great game is my great sport is baseball and the Dodgers. And I love the Dodgers. And, I grew up a Yankee fan. And this is a big deal. I got a kid from New York, This is almost sacrilegious. A kid from New York coming out to California and becoming a Dodger fan, actually in my neighborhood where I grew up, you either hated the Yankees and loved the Dodgers, or you loved the Dodgers and you loved the Yankees and hated the Dodgers. It was between the two blocks. There were the Dodger fans and there were the Yankee fans, and I was a Yankee fan. Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, I know the whole team. I know every position. But and if you're a fan, if you really love your sport, you're going to know every one of them. You're going to know everything about them. You're going to live that sport, And basketball. I'm very aware of football. I'm very aware of, and I love to watch basketball. And I'm very proud of actually in particular, very proud of the Lakers this year. They're just zooming along, and I hope they go all the way. In behalf of Kobe, I hope they do. But it's baseball. It's baseball, and even in this limited season, I continue to be an avid fan. And I must say, Tom, baseball is my greatest love of all.
Right. Well, on that note, we'll close. We'll send it back to Gilbert. Maybe we can get Mookie Betts to join us next time when we have a conversation.
Man, Mookie's incredible, isn't he?
Very much so.
Have you Gilbert? Do you follow baseball at all, Gilbert?
I am. You said the Dodgers, and I hopped back on here because I love the Dodgers, and so glad that you were able to say that. I'm so glad that you became a Dodgers fan, despite the fact of your Yankee.
And Mookie Betts, and Mookie Betts and Seager, they're incredible. What a season! Watch the baseball. It's just getting started. We're going all the way.
I agree.
Thank you, thank you, Vroman, and thank you, Rod. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Romans, and thank you so much for everything.
Thank you to both of you. We really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. And don't forget, you can buy David's book here, Wheels of Courage. It's down there. You click on that button down at the bottom. It'll take you over to the Vroman's website. Also, if you want to scroll up in the chat here on the side, at one point, Tom did mention the 40th anniversary edition of Born the 4th of July with Bruce Springsteen forward, and I linked that in there as well, just so you know, because we enjoyed a lot of what Ron had to say tonight, so you can get the full book there. And we ask you in general. We know folks here made the effort to support independent bookstores by tuning in tonight. We continue to ask for your help during this tough time by buying books from us. If you want to do your Christmas shopping, we hope that you can do all your Christmas shopping. We got plenty of stuff to purchase there. It's kind of a one-stop shop. I know it's September and we're talking about Christmas. I know it feels weird, but Wheels of Courage is a great way to start that gift list. And I think there's got quite a few people out there who know others that they might be able to get that for. So again, thank you so much, gentlemen. Vroman is truly appreciative of your time and everything that you did for us tonight. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Gilbert. Yeah.
All right. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe to our newsletter if you'd like. Follow us on social media. Visit us at vromansbookstore.com, and we hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful night, everybody.
Thank you.